So, I was recently inspired to build something in a spooky, parody, fantasy way, mixing pirates with fantastic elements like your typical giant sea monsters, kraken, jellyfish, ghosts, spooky ships, treasures, maybe some flying ships or giant birds. So, I found the best island ever right behind me. Let's take a look. I looked for a nice seat because I did not want to build the whole island. I could have, didn't feel like it. And I found this gorgeous jungle island. Like, that seat is absolutely awesome. Just as the spawn, you have this incredible island. It has it all, like any kind of terrain you want. You want some cliffs? Gotcha. Gentle, sheer, spooky, you choose. You want some caves? It got your back. Mysterious, dangerous, lush, bright, dark. You can choose. And like for the terrain, it has like a giant mountain, but it also has some slopey, gentle area with some forest, some rocks, some stones. It's going to be perfect to have a great transition between a harbor into a midtown worker area where you prep some fish, handle the boats, and then you have like the living quarters, and I can see everything on this island. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So, in order to get a baseline for the scale of the buildings on the island, I decided to start by the pier. It's an interesting element because it sets the tone for the past, the boats, and the future buildings along all of the walkways that will spread throughout the island. As always, I start by blocking out the general shapes in order to nail the proportions before committing to a block palette and detailing them. Very quickly, I moved on from the pier to the city gates. Since it's the first element you see while arriving on this side of the island, it had to be able to quickly tell the story of the place. I rolled with my first idea, which was to make the visitors have to walk through a gaping fish mouth. I believe this is optimal as it quickly conveys that this island is inhabited by people of the sea who hunt great aquatic monsters, which allows the visitor to understand a great deal about the people and the environment they are living in. I decided to make it a skeleton for a bit more mystery and drama, and I also turned it a bit more into an eel than a fish at the end of the day, which was a much more recognizable shape and also allowed me to have these beautiful trailing skeletons that I'll be able to make the walkway go through to lead to a different building. At this stage, the blocking is done, and to verify that it's cohesive and sets the mood that I want, I immerse myself into it by taking a quick walking tour. And since I really like the feeling of walking through that ribcage, I take a break from the skeleton and start detailing the pier. This allows me to come back to the skeleton later with a bit of a fresher eye and figure out if I missed something in the excitement of the moment. It's time to replace my blocking with the actual color palette and figure out the fine details of the bridge. As you can see, this is not an easy task, especially since this bridge is on an angle. I wanted to make some smooth, slopey arches in between the pillars, but I kind of spaced them poorly, so I had to resort to a much steeper angle than I originally wanted. But at the end of the day, I found it satisfactory, so I moved on. I had originally planned to use blue on a whim for the walkways, but I found red to actually contrast really nicely with the ocean, making the pier stand out a lot more. It's also a lot more dramatic, since one could be reminded of blood, danger by seeing it. Since this is a small build, I kept the detail minimal to not make it too busy, only breaking out a few planks here and there and leaving a few pebbles. To make it even more dramatic, I flanked the two sides of the hills with fire pit, which could be used to convey where the island is and the entrances during the night, which is where things are going to get really dangerous. To make the skeleton really impressive, I banked on using plenty of spiky teeth. Color-wise, I went with some standard dish skeleton colors, a bit on the darker side to roughen it up a bit and convey that it had been exposed to the elements during maybe quite a few storms, which indicate that it was slain a bit of a while ago. This color phase is also where I take the opportunity to refine the shape a bit, using stairs, slabs and wall to break up every square edges and give the skeleton a bit of a smoother, more natural look. To make the place really inviting, I made the blood red path go through the heel mouth and also along the spine, like it was the bloody inside of the beast still remaining on the ground. The ribcage was extremely tricky to detail as every block is at an angle. I originally wanted to use walls and fences to make them sharper, but it wouldn't work with the weirder angles, leaving a lot of unsightly gaps everywhere. So I kept true to my blocking and just used strip clock. I love their directional natures, and if you squint a bit, it could look like old bones. I chose to use a slightly darker tone for the ribs in order to detach their silhouettes from the rest of the skeleton and highlight the spine. If I would just have used the same blocks everywhere, it would have looked like a jumbled mess and the silhouette would have been absolutely unreadable. Making the individual vertebrae was fairly straightforward, as I just kept going with what I had defined for the head. The next real challenge was to create the spikes on the back, as I wanted them to be sharper than the blocking, but just like for the ribs, their varying angles made it impossible to settle on some design that would work throughout. If something looked great on the straight part, it was terrible on the curved one, and vice versa, and I wasn't ready to give up on my angles, as they gave the build its fluidity. With straighter parts, it would have looked really stiff and artificial, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. I ended up settling on making them smaller and just using stairs, as they can be used on any angle. And it didn't really look like heel spike at the end, but it worked in context, and that was all that matters. Next, it was time to give the pass a bit more love, and I had this idea of having a very small river go through the skeleton, so I started working on a bridge design. Drinking up darker grey colors really helped the dramatic mood and setting apart man-made elements from the more natural skeletons and environment. Speaking of which, I added a few lanterns hanging from the skeleton, which helped integrate human life with it, and make the place feel used and more lived in. Eventually, I will add other elements along the path as I figure out how it connects to the rest of the city, but for now, that will do perfectly. I also wanted to delimitate the path a bit more, as for now it was just kind of floating on the grass, which looked pretty terrible. So I added a bit of a trim to it, which made the edges more sturdy and able to resist the natural elements around it. Speaking of which, for the skeleton to show its age, I had to make it look like nature was starting to gain back on it. So I added a few plants, also taking advantage of the glowberry properties to light the path and the inside of the head a bit more. These steps really helped to connect everything and bring the remaining loose end together. It also added details and a lot more interesting elements to look at while working under the ribcage. It also dampened the feeling of danger a bit, making the space feel a tiny bit safer. At this stage, the only glaring loose end remaining was that this whole build was not yet really integrated into its environment. The plants really helped selling the idea that it had been put there a while ago, but on the ground it still didn't feel super connected. So the natural next step was to start some terraforming work. Since I knew I wanted the river to float under the bridge, it had to be the focus of the terraforming. It also had to either connect to the sea in a waterfall or form a small pond. I chose to just let it flow through, as I have more idea for ponds down the line, a bit more inside the island. I originally thought it could be a lot bigger, maybe big enough to navigate on it, but making a giant river would really undermine the scale of the skeleton, and I wanted it to be this impressive centerpiece and not the river. So I just let it be for now, making it small and really natural, until I decide how the pirates are going to interact with it at least, and maybe I'm going to put a few buildings or elements on it. At least I know I want to put a lighthouse not too far away, as I believe it's important in order for the pirates to be able to safely navigate back to the port. In this story I'm telling, I don't think I want to make other humans a threat to my pirates. I just think sailor against the world and its aquatic danger will be enough thrill. So they won't have to worry about other factions discovering the island and maybe attacking them. Well, for now at least. Maybe I will develop that side later. But for now I really want to focus on aquatic monsters and supernatural danger lurking in the backside of the island. At this point, I'm really just putting the final touches, as I'm really happy about how the build has come along. Just texturing the ground with some lush grass, installing the trim of the rest of the paths, which ended up looking tiny as a consequence. Cubes can be so tricky to make right, so I quickly corrected that. But this really highlights how important getting the scale of every element right is, if you don't want your build to look silly. This path will probably lead to a building connected to the lighthouse, and I'm probably going to also branch it off someplace between two ribs to go to the higher part of the hills, and I'm probably going to have some other connection from that lighthouse building, maybe to the upper part of the island or some docks lower, maybe that could be interesting as well. Now, all that's left to do is enjoy the epicness of the place through a beautiful walkthrough, which really shows how scary the mouth is from the pier, but also how cozy everything actually feels inside. Overall, I'm really happy with how this first part looks like. I hadn't built anything in such a long time and I was a bit nervous, but it turned out really okay and I'm really happy with what I did today. Just the contrast between the epic and the cozy vibe, between the blood red path and the tropical blue pure water, gives such a unique and magical feel to the place. And as you can see, it looks really epic under every angle, and I think it will be really interesting to look down upon it from the highlands once this area gets developed. So that's kind of it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really pumped up about these projects and I cannot wait to build that lighthouse next time. I'm going to leave you off with a few before and after screenshots, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!